midway into the program where we had successfully identified these out-of-school children, be able to convince the community, working with the communities to bring them back to school, enroll them into this accelerated program, go through the accelerated program, just at the point of mainstreaming them back into school, Trump pulled off the plug. So what do we do with those children? We are talking of over 500,000 children. What do we do with them? That is the impact. Is simply looking at these children and saying, sorry, your future is damned. If you talk about basic social services and you are not talking about local government, you're playing games. We're talking of even federal, who is not meeting the education commitment of 15%. As of today, our education commitment is still abysmally low. We're looking at 1.5%. We still don't have our government funding our education by as much as even just 3%. And that's the federal government who controls most of the budget, not to talk of states. I'm not aware of any state government funding education and health by as much as 3-5%. None. As far as the government is concerned, how is the household determined? A husband, a wife, and 3 children. What happens in most parts of northern Nigeria? Most families, an average man has 2-3 wives. Sometimes 4.
Exponentially 15 to 20 children.
Good. By that statement alone and that way of working, you have excluded thousands of families and children and women. I changed. I said, no. What I will do, since I now lead the work of plan, we will register households by mothers, which means if we go to a house, we'll ask the man, how many wives do you have? If he has 4 wives, each of the wife is a household. In that way, no child is forgotten, no child is excluded, and no woman is forgotten.
This is Like a Local, brought to you by Volumpod in collaboration with Connected Development Budget Foundation with support from the Hilton Foundation.
Thanks for joining in, and this is Like a Local. I'm Femi D. Amelem. Well, this is one of the many editions of conversations around localization of ideas. So often, in many developing countries, there's a challenge of problems and who owns the problem and who best appropriate solutions and maybe even funding that will bring some kind of solutions to some of those challenges. And yes, as with foreign aid, there are ideas on what type of solution, and the decision on how to solve that particular problem is often appropriated. But some school of thought also bear in mind that it could be ideal to find local actors, resolve some of those challenges, and decide how funds are best appropriated for such a challenge. Well, that makes localization one that is very hard to define. If somebody is with the money, another person is with the problem, and yet the solution lingers on somewhere in between. Well, Like a Local is brought to you, co-implemented, of course, by Budget Foundation and Connected Development, with support from the Hilton Foundation. And I have the appropriate guests who would help me navigate and as well help you navigate a strong understanding of what we intend to do with Like a Local. So when we think Like a Local, maybe just the solution will be local. My guest today is Dr. Chris Usie is the country director, Plan International Nigeria. And yes, as a country director, he has appropriate experience, 20 years extensive experience working across many organizations across the world, including at some point Christian Aid UK. He has led a team of over 390 experts delivering life-changing interventions for poor and marginalized people. He's especially passionate about environment, exactly why he did his doctorate in that very area, and is also very passionate about the girl child and what happens and the decisions and if they get to have a say in matters that concern them. With that said, please welcome with me Dr. Chris. Good to have you on.
Thank you for me. Charles, actually.
I said Jesus Christ.
People confuse Charles, Chris, yeah.
Are you serious? Oh, yeah. Okay. I will go with that. Forgive me and I will revise with that, Dr. Charles. I'm so sorry about that.
No,
okay. So let's push in a little bit with regards to issue of localization. Yeah. I mean, I would want to lean on your experience over 20 years working across this sector at different levels. top level, middle level, and you've seen how problem statements sometimes never really get funded or go away. What's your thoughts about identifying problems that need solutions to be funded and finding a local solution around it? How would one evaluate such an environment at this time?
I think from my wealth of experience, like you said, over 2 decades in the sector, I think finding solutions, as it were, to local problems shouldn't be as complex or as difficult as it is. You'll agree with me. If you look at the world, everywhere where we have had some form of advancement, major advancement, a turning point like landmark advancement that has lifted millions of people out of poverty, that has changed significantly the landscape of a group of people, you will find out that the very fabric and principles that brought about that change were local. To that extent, the question comes back to, then what is local? And that's where I think the debate, has stalled for many years. Yeah.
And I agree with you, because that definition, even now that I read quite a number of theses around localization, there's been the debate, especially in the last 2-3 years, that funding strategy is changing. And people say, okay, now that you're not going to give us much funds as from the UK, from the US, and some of those very eminent places from developed countries, let's find local solutions to our local problems, especially in gaps with what the government is not doing. For example, let's take a look at what Plan International is doing with the girl child. I know when you started off your role in Plan, your first visit was to Yobe, right, where you spoke to quite a number of local NGOs. I think that was 2022 or thereabouts. I picked up on the date appropriately. Yes, if my glasses has been right, this should be 23rd of March 2022. And you addressed quite a number of local actors about the work they're doing and how they're doing it well. But from then till now, the landscape has changed, and you see quite a number of exits from those who are passionate about doing such work. So localization, it's not only being redefined, it's also it's having a forced exit as it is. What has happened?
So let's give a background to this whole conversation about localization. And I like to provide this background so that people understand it. I actually also like to say that, and I make bold to say, I ran the very first localization workshop in Nigeria with a group of local actors. I dare say that. And that was as far back as 2017. And why I say this is because this whole framing and concept of localization, as we say it today, especially in the development sector, got its main root in 2016 from the World Humanitarian Summit. So Ban Ki-moon at that time, who was the Secretary General of the United Nations at that time, agreed with some key leaders that humanitarian response was not bringing the kind of change we wanted to see. So much money, so much investment, but still populations have been left behind. Some of them even left even more deplorable than they initially met them. And decades after, you don't see a significant shift in the lives of those people. And so he said, you know what, let's all come together and think about how we do this thing called humanitarian. And he gathered the very first humanitarian summit, what was called the World Humanitarian Summit. There were over 9,000 participants. Almost all the big NGOs, small NGOs, UN that you can think of attended that conference in Turkey in 2016. There were over 180 countries represented, 55 heads of state. So it was a big conference. There was a lot of talking. There was the best brains you can ever think of in this world were in that conference. And they had one question: how do we rethink humanitarian action for it to be relevant to the people who are in need? And the conversation lasted a couple of days, even weeks. And a couple of strong resolutions came out. One of them was what we called the Grand Bargain. What was the Grand Bargain? It was an agreement by all the biggest donors in the world, the biggest institutions, philanthropists, foundations, saying, you know what, we're going to put more money, more resources, more support for active, life-changing, transformational humanitarian action. Everybody agreed. Another thing, we're going to focus on humanity. When we talk humanitarian, we're going to ensure that humanity is at the center of whatever action we do, which means we're going to focus on the living realities of people. We're going to make sure we don't leave anybody behind. That's where the concept of leave no one behind came from.
Yes.
Good. Another agreement, they said, you know what? We're not going to do humanitarian alone, exclusive of the investment we make in development and social development and peace. So they came up with a framework which we call the Humanitarian-Development-Peace Nexus. Right?
Yes.
And then finally, they said, you know what? People work in isolation. Even the UN agencies, donors, we all work in isolation. Everybody doing their own thing, get their own data. Why not we forge a new level of partnership that will allow everybody define their space, their value, their intention, and connect the dots so that we have a tipping point when we all add up, in terms of our work. These were lofty jokes, isn't it?
It sounds, it really
sounded like, oh, we're going to change the world. Yeah. So this is 2026. Exactly 10 years after. Where are we with that? We are now fighting over who owns resources. So how did we come from these lofty dreams into reducing localization to a question of who has money, who gets it, who uses it? From that conference, the whole localization idea was that at least 25% was clearly stated. If there were no gray lines, at least 25% of total humanitarian funding should go to local actors. That's what it said. It didn't say all money. It didn't say all funds. It didn't say international actors should get out. It didn't say foreign interests should get out. It didn't say foreign knowledge should leave. It said, for the funding, 25% must go directly into the hands and pockets of local actors. Which makes that, for me, is where people have gotten stuck to say, where is the 25% first? And then who is considered local to be eligible for that?
If I could just my question.
So that's where we are. And for us in Plan International, our role is to define how that mechanism works by the way we operate. And so when I came into Plan, one of the things I did was to say, Plan, we're an international NGO. We were set up with it close to 90 years ago. Next year will be our 90th anniversary. Let's say as Plan International. Even in Nigeria, we're just 10 years old. And we're set up to seek for the rights of children and equality for girls everywhere in the world. So currently we have about 85 entities in 84 countries. So what do? We say we're a global organization, right? So when we work in a country like this, we don't assume we know everything. We don't assume that we know all the local context. So we partner by mandate with local CBOs and NGOs who are based in what we call entities and have a legitimate representation, as it were, of local actors. In fact, at some point we define it by constituency, that as an NGO or a CBO, you must have a constituency that sees you as their mouthpiece, just the way we represent, just the way we elect representatives, into the National Assembly.
Yes.
We feel that local actors should have that same level of, relationship with the communities or constituencies they claim to serve. And for us, that is local.
It's interesting that you do bring that up. I mean, if the way Plan has worked for the 90 years, 84 entities across the world, and now in Nigeria, it also tells me that if you're spending a lot of resources working with local actors who connect with constituencies, every constituency has its own challenge or problem. Except it also means that you have a diversified set of problems that you're appealing to. But as you and I already know, that many funding organizations don't really like when you have to solve too many problems and it is not a focal problem that is a duplicate of what's happening in Yobe, Kaduna, maybe some of those states, that the problems are replicated, but you have to now find custom solutions to that. How have you been able to work with those local actors who you say sit over certain constituents and connect with them, and they tell you oh, this is what we see, this is what we think we should be funding, and this is what we think we should be doing.
So it's by conversation that happens. One of the principles that came out of the World Humanitarian Summit was the whole principle around partnership, equality and partnership. So as an international NGO working in Nigeria, the first thing we do is to define our strategy. How do we define our strategy? We first identify the constituency we want to serve, which is poor people, children, girls, and the people who had impact on their lives, which is their families. So we have consultations, we have deep, extensive consultations to say, this is who we are. We are best at supporting the lives of children and girls. In your environments, what are the main issues? What are the key issues that affect children and girls? Tell us. And then they tell us, and we say, okay, we will not have the resources to do everything, so we're going to prioritize. Based on this long list you've given to us, which are the top 3, 4 that you feel are the most urgent? And if we do it, we'll put a shift, we'll shoot the needle when it comes to children and issues that affect girls. Then we come up with our prioritization. When we have those prioritization, then we're going to another level of conversation to say, within your context, who do you trust is best placed to help you if we want to work with you, to join hands with us to help solve this problem? That's where they begin to identify local CBOs, NGOs that they trust, that they know that can work with us. And then, when we have all of that information, which is more like going to the market, when you want to cook a pot of soup, this is the first thing you do, right? Yeah. From home, you write your list. Then you go to the market. Then you begin to shop. Some of the things change. Because many
I was looking forward to you saying so.
Yes. No, of course, especially in a place like Nigeria, it must change. Your market list must change. So here, what happens is that we now customize the market list together with the community members, with the partners they identify, and together we form our strategy. When we have this strategy, we go back, we test the strategy, we agree, we launch the strategy. So that's why you find most organizations will launch a strategy. What that strategy says is a public statement saying, this is what we want to do, this is how we're going to do it, where we're going to do it, and to the extent at which we're going to do it. On the basis of that, we define our boundaries of what we'll do and will not do. And for the things that fall outside of our remit, we seek for partnership with those who are best at doing it. And then we build those partnerships and collaboration.
Foreign aid is tricky a little bit because with foreign aid comes different countries with their own sets of what to do, whether it's with the Germans or whether it's with the Britons, one way or the other.
You had explained how you work with the local actors within Plan International, and it's brilliant that a lot of that decision making, and there's a framework on which you approach things, and it seems quite settled from your end. But when I think about some of the other international NGOs, in which, by the way, you had a role, a top level role in coordinating. I don't know what appropriate title to go by, but you had a top role in coordinating those affairs of the INGOs. I can only imagine with every country from Germany, UK, the US, the United States of America, and I do say so because of President Trump, everybody has their own variation into how they want to approach funding. That must be a difficult conversation among INGOs as regards what to do with the local actors or how to deal with local actors now. Isn't that so?
Well, at some point it was. As at when the conversation around localization was at its peak, I was actually the chair of the INGO Forum. And the INGO Forum is the International NGOs Forum made up of all the international NGOs active in Nigeria, mostly in the humanitarian space. As of today, we have 64 registered members, of which 4 are observers, 60 are full members. Some of the biggest international NGOs you have across the world. And like you said, yes, some of them, everybody had their understanding, interpretation, and preference for what they consider to be localization and how the partnership should be done, funding, and the engagement should be done. So what we agreed, and I remember chairing several of those meetings saying, guys, it's not a one person's, agenda that we're going to run here. The onus lies on us as a forum in Nigeria to define what it means for us working in Nigeria. If we all here live and maybe go, the same number of organizations here are probably in the same organizations in South Sudan. They will define what localization means for them. We will define what it means for us here. In that way, that is even the start of localization, because then you're translating global ideas and agenda into where the need is greatest. In fact, the mantra at that time was as local as possible and as international as necessary. So as much as possible, it must be from a local lens. And so to that extent, we agreed to say, let's have a joined-up approach to localization. And on the basis of that agreement, we created a program for local actors, which we call PLRCAP. It's an acronym that simply means a partnership with local actors for transferring capacity, funding, and solidarity with local actors to deliver change for populations. And it's a program that's been running for the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, but that's, I believe that's capacity-wise.
Yes, capacity-wise.
Funding-wise, Nigeria is now where, I mean, the shrinking factor around Nigeria's fund, for example, it's scary.
Yeah. So funding-wise, what most of us committed to in a non-binding format was to, as much as possible, absorb local actors into our implementation framework. So in that way, because then at some point, like I mentioned earlier,
yes,
the conversation began to look like it was a competition for resources between international and local. And I always try to explain.
Is it not?
No, it's not. The framework are different. Let me give you an example. The EU, for instance, is literally, if not the biggest donor in Nigeria. Right? However, the EU has a funding framework that already excludes any non-EU entity from applying for its funds. So what's the competition there between international NGOs who are eligible to access EU funding and local actors who are not eligible? There is no competition. The international actors will still apply and get EU funding to work in Nigeria. For the local actors, no matter how competent you are, as long as you are not an EU-registered entity, you are not eligible for that money. So, in that sense, there is no competition. And it is the same with most major donors. As a local actor, you can't, if the UK announces its budget for international development, you can't easily access it if you're not pre-qualified and, part of the system, part of the UK system. They have those conditionalities. So in that sense, between local actors and international NGOs, there's no competition in that sense. However, what we did was to influence the donors to say, see, if you continue in this mandate, you put the entire pressure on us to find ways for the funding we receive to find ways to channel it through local actors, which we are fine to do. But it will still be a trickle, a drop. Why not you create your own mechanism to give funds directly? So the EU now has a small budget, of course, in the spirit of localization, where they give grants directly to local NGOs. The UK, I know, developed a framework like that. In fact, just before Trump, the US made one of their biggest, decisions when it comes to localization. They were going to shift as much as almost 40 to 50% of total USAID funding through local actors. If you only know how much money we're talking about, as at then, the US had a budget of at least $1.2 billion every year for Nigeria alone. So almost 50% of that is over 500 million. Please mention how many NGOs can absorb that amount of money every year.
I heard about that, and then Trump came to freeze
he just collapsed.
And there are many reasons from his own perspective, and there are reasons also from Nigeria that people say, all kinds of things about INGOs and the likes of that. But I wanted to also look at the peculiarity of some funding per country. The UK, with almost no pressure, decided that, because of war that is coming up, right, we're going to shrink the funding. the minister in charge of that particular portfolio resigned, immediately after, that pronouncement was done. He resigned and went to do other things because he felt, this was not this doesn't fall in tandem with my value. In the US, President Trump is larger than any political actor in the US. It literally throws out any executive funding that goes to developing countries and tells everybody, find a smart way to do what you do. Of course, the Assembly, the Senate and the likes of that, they also have their own funding that they also give for all of that. We're seeing a situation where the mindset, or should I say the policy position of a lot of these countries are changing around funding. And they may not mean to you, but they may not also see what happens to the local actors. But down the line, you find more local actors who probably tell you, just like you said, this is their constituency, this is what they want to do. But they are now pitching tents with more than one area because of the, should I say, parity of funds. How has it been managing that process where you've listened to conversations at the international level and they tell you this is the reason why this can't be anymore, and then you have to tell your local actors we have to change the strategy from what we originally wrote out?
It's been one of the most difficult things we've done. In my over 2 decades of international development in especially Africa, I think this period is literally the most difficult. If there was one time I actually was convinced that, you know what, I'm done with this, throwing the towel and walking away, this will be the time. Because it is the most depressing period of our lives. I'll give you a practical example. We're running a program in Yobe State. I'm being very specific here now, so that people understand the gravity of what we're dealing with. It's an education project. And it's a project focused on helping to mainstream what we term out-of-school children back into formal school. So we came up with a model which we call the Accelerated Basic Education. It's an intellectual property of Plan International. But we work with the government, Federal Ministry of Education. We launched it 3 years ago. The federal government has adopted it, and they're happy. In fact, we rolled it out at national level, And what this program is supposed to do is, for instance, if you find a child who is 15 years who has been out of school all their life, and you want to place the child back into school, what class do you place the child? This child has never been to school. Or even the child, let's say the child dropped out of school at, say, maybe primary 1 and is 15. How do you place the child back? So we curated this 9 months intensive, what we call Accelerated Basic Education program, which will take the child through courses, and there's a specific pedagogy that goes with it, where the teacher will be able to, at the end of the 9 months, graduate the child into the appropriate learning class, for the child. Brilliant work, amazing piece of work. Was funded by the US government. It was a consortium of 2 international NGOs, 2 local partners in a consortium, covering Yobe and Borno State, and I think even Adamawa. The plan was within a 3-year period to mainstream over 1.5 million children back into formal school, right? So we started the program. And we were midway into the program where we had successfully identified these out-of-school children, be able to convince the community, working with the communities to bring them back to school, enroll them into this accelerated program, go through the accelerated program. Just at the point of mainstreaming them back into school, Trump pulled off the plug. So what do we do with those children? We are talking of over 500,000 children. What do we do with them? That is the impact. That's what we're talking about.
What did you then do?
Of course, we went ahead to the best of our ability with the little resources we had. We mainstreamed that batch, but we couldn't enroll more. So not being able to enroll more is simply looking at these children and saying, sorry, your future is damned. Because nobody's going to do it. And as I speak to you, nobody's enrolling children there anymore. It brings us to the fundamental question of what is international development aid used for in a country like Nigeria. And the truth about it is that, in the first place, why should the United States government be spending money on educating our own children? Is it that we don't have a government? We don't have a Yobe state government. We don't have a federal government. If you look at the Constitution, education is a basic right. So why should we leave that at the mercy of donors? That, for me, is one of the fundamental questions we should even ask. If we run these programs as a palliative, in fact, this particular program I just explained, 9 months short course, if that is all that we fund, I will even sleep well at night. But I'm talking of the full spectrum. Basic education, infrastructure, books, teaching, training for teachers, sometimes even allowances for teachers to be able to continue their jobs because the government will not pay them. So you see, part of the problem of international development is the failure of the recipient country to do just what they are supposed to do.
And there's always some sense of a fallback system that usually when you draw out the strategies or even projects and to plan out, because I've had my own foothold as well in this space, and I know in development space, the case scenarios is if this doesn't work, something's supposed to play.
Yeah.
What was it like? And I know you probably tried this. What was it like, putting that education project before the Yobe government to say, oh, now that the funding that we're supposed to use to get all these children and this batch after they're gone is not in the way anymore, would you be able to step in? This is not a full school program. This is not you funding primary school or secondary school. This is you funding an abridged version of 7 to 10 years of education that this girl did not get in 9 months. What was their reaction to that?
So from the very beginning, of course, the state government will not even allow you to run a program like that if they don't buy into it.
True.
So they were all the governments there in the Northeast were all receptive of the program and of the support and investment. Many of them stepped up, to adopt the program and to scale it up. Borno State did very well. They scaled up most of the intervention education programs. And I'm just using education as an example.
Of course, yes.
There were nutrition intervention like that, food.
HIV.
To be fair, the government stepped up and they absorbed most of these programs. The recipients, the participants, we call them community participants, not beneficiaries. They did that. But the question is, to what extent are they able to do that consistently over time? Because in the first place, that we have those number of people missing out was a failure of government, right?
True.
So it's the same government correcting themselves. So yes, there were efforts to make shifts. But the question is that the budget was not just there. We're talking of state government who do appropriation. There is still no state government. We're talking of even federal who is not meeting the education commitment of 15%. As of today, our education commitment is still abysmally low. We're looking at 1.5%. I think budget is very good at putting out those statistics. We still don't have our government funding our education by as much as even just 3%. And that's the federal government who controls most of the budget, not to talk of state. I'm not aware that there's any state government. Maybe Lagos. I've not looked at the statistics. Maybe Lagos. But I'm not aware of any state government funding education and health by as much as 3-5%. None. So the money is not just there. Good intention.
Or it's there, but not being used for it.
Okay, yeah, so maybe that's it. The money is maybe there, but appropriated differently. And then that's exclusive right of the state assemblies, because that's where the action is. That's what localization is all about. It's closest to where the action is, as close as possible. Now, the Tinubu government talked about local government autonomy. How far have we gone with that? Because if truly the local governments have autonomy and receive the budget that they're supposed to receive, they could be the easiest people to absorb this group of people. Because that's where you can actually put faces to names. It's at local government, not even state. Forget federal. So anytime we talk about education, we talk about healthcare, and you are not talking about local government, forget it, you're playing games.
Yeah.
You are playing games. And we know how these games work. Because we come, we talk big statements, but for some of us who are practitioners on the field, if you talk about basic social services and you are not talking about local government, you're playing games. Trust me, because that's where the action is. That's where it's happening. And if you're not prioritizing local government structure, local government autonomy, local government responsibility, funding, leadership, you're playing games. And it's deliberate, it's intentional. You want to divert attention and just, do whatever it is. Well, so that was our experience. We were able to speak with the state government, because the local governments were literally struggling.
Non-existent. I was just going to mention
so
that.
It was more of the state government. They absorbed as much as they could, but that's only so far they can go. And the onus still lies on them to pick it up and run with it.
Let's also talk about localization and the kind of branding. And I say that enunciating a little bit, branding put around it, especially because in the last 1 year, 2 years, every time some NGO, INGO funds a CBO or there's some fund exchange, there's a strong tendency that somebody out there would rebrand it and say, oh, you're funding some non-state actors, through funding, through that process, because INGOs and the work they do in the North is super registered. There's a strict measure around that. And because there's a strict measure around that, it's almost like this is what you said you do, localization, this is what you said you do. You cannot go outside of that. How is that like, especially in the North, where specifics to the details is the key of the game?
So it's a very difficult balance to always track at every point in time. Now, sometimes this is the way it plays out. So you go to the states, you speak with state governments, local governments, community members, you identify problems, you agree on solutions, right? On the basis of that, you use that to write a proposal, convince donors sitting somewhere else who have never been here to say, see, this is the problem. These are the likely solutions. Trust us with the money. Trust us. We'll give you accountability. We'll do exactly this. See the evidence that we've consulted. See the evidence that we've spoken to the people who are mostly affected. This is the evidence we'll show you that we've arrived at this. They give you the money based on trust, based on what you've provided. You go back now to the committee to say, now, remember we talked about the problems, right? Now we've come with the solutions. And then all of a sudden they said, no, we want you to shift and do something else. And we said, no, we can't shift. This money was given based on trust and a contract that this is what we're going to do. We consulted you. We agreed this was what we're going to do. We've gotten the money and you want us to shift? We can't. You're breaking the contract. Well, and this contract most times is by trust. We wrote a proposal, they scrutinized it, and based on trust, they gave us the money. We signed the contract. So if we're going to make any shift, we have to go back to our donors. Most state governments don't like that because they feel we're in charge. This is our people, this is our community. We tell you what to do. And we're like, sorry, doesn't work that way.
And most donors also don't like that.
Most donors don't like that because donors is like, it's our money. We tell you, you told us you're going to do this. We want you to do that. So that dynamic is usually very difficult, to manage. And we understand why there are times when things must shift. So, for instance, some years ago, many of us were busy doing our normal work. We didn't anticipate that the dam in Borno was going to break and cause the kind of flooding that we saw. But we just woke up one day and, oh my God, the whole town, the whole place was flooded. And at that point, the government called all of us and said, we have to respond. What do? You didn't have a budget for flooding. What do you do? So we have to repurpose monies that were meant for education, that were meant for health, that were meant for other things. We have to repurpose it to support people who are affected by flooding. Now, the response time for any agency was the amount of time it took them to gather evidence, to speak to their donors, to convince their donors, to give them the approval to repurpose the money. That would be the amount of time. That was why you found some agencies like Plan International who responded exactly in 42 hours. In 42 hours, my team were on ground, picking people out of their homes that were flooded, giving them relief materials. Like, in 42 hours, we were all over the place. Some NGOs were like that. For some, it took them 2 weeks. All dependent on the extent to which they could go back to their back donors to negotiate and ask for permission to repurpose the money to support an agenda that was totally not on the picture when the money was given to them. So it's a very difficult balance to create. And most times you're caught in the middle between your donors and the government. You're there in the middle. And the question at that point in time is whose priority should take, whose interest should take priority at that point? In my opinion, is the community, which means what do the community really need? And if we're able to define it, irrespective of what the donors want, irrespective of what the state government wants, the priority of the people should.
And I agree with you, because at the end of the day, it's the people that bear the brunt of inaction, if I would say, if there's a stalemate as regards what needs to be done. But at the same time, impact assessment, as it's now a whole new ball game when it comes to funds given, accountability, because people used to think accountability is all about what, when you crunch and put the numbers back to say this is what this looks like, this was what this was. And so you have funds, you have accountability, and you have impact assessment. And there's been talks as well about, in quotes now, some NGOs in Nigeria where, and forgive me, bloated languages are used for impact assessment. And especially for the ones where they know the donor may not really be invested in going. If you're an NGO in Abuja doing something in Abuja, they know anybody in Abuja can come and check. But if you're in Borno State, in one corner of the end, and you have to do a project close to the border of another country, they know it's like people may not come to check. So there's accountability and there's impact assessment. How do you, one, and this conversation as regards localization, how does one do impact assessment in a terrain or in a scope where measurements and tools for measurements, it's very difficult to ascertain that they are appropriate to use? For example, I know donors will tell you, this is how we measure impact assessment, make sure it's in your report. You go on ground, say, sir, these tools don't work here. How do you navigate that?
So it's always negotiated. It's always negotiated. And when we talk about impact assessment, people confuse impact assessment for outcome results. They are two different things. So if a donor gives me money to do a piece of work, for instance, in education, to renovate some schools, to put in equipment, to train the teachers, and to help children go back to school, right? What people confuse for impact will be, are the schools renovated? Are children in school? Are the teachers being trained? That's not impact. Those are outcomes. In fact, in some instances, those are just outputs. What you put in, what you get out. Doesn't mean anything. Outcome is when you begin to look at, are the children learning? What is the quality of what they are learning? Are they learning in a comfortable, empowering space? Is the teaching conducive? Do the teachers have the confidence to teach? Those are outcomes. They don't come in 1 year. They don't come in 2 years. So over the years, donors have understood this. And what they do is that you can't be measuring impact when the action is still ongoing. If the action is still ongoing, what you're measuring is output and outcomes. So what donors would do is to say, do your action. Take action for whatever it is we've commissioned you to do. We will get a third party, independent from you, outside of the equation, who will come and check.
Monitoring and evaluation, yeah?
So most donors right now, literally all the biggest donors, employ what we call third-party monitors. These are the ones who go to check for impact. They are outside of the people who take the action. Most times, in the past, they used to be foreign, so they have to fly into the country, and then they now begin to face some of these challenges you talked about. They can't go to some locations and everything. Most donors have become smart. What they do, they get third-party monitors who are local, who can also go to the place like me and you, who are also familiar with the terrain, and they can go as far as they've commissioned you to go and check if what you've done actually is making an impact. And that, for me, is a game changer. And that has happened across board. It's happening every day. And the more that happens, we begin to negotiate what impact will mean for the donor and for the community members. And I think that for me is what we should be concerned about. When we say impact, me delivering the action should not be too much focused on measuring my own impact. If truly I've done a good job, I should be confident in just focusing on the work I do, knowing that there will be an impact assessment and trusting the process that whoever comes to check will see the impact that I've been able to deliver. And that confidence is what makes us professionals.
It's interesting that you do say so. And of course, impact assessment, I've also seen a situation, and I'm pushing you on this. And it's when it comes to localization and impact assessment, there's also the tendency that the environment, external factors, like we say in business, but there are external factors like insecurity that is not backing down. External factors such as, the government, the politics or the election of the day has changed the government that, or the governor that had verbal agreements, MOU agreements, and all those kind of elements that were in play. So you find external factors like insecurity in play, and local actors start to tell you the local action that we all agreed to, that we wanted to do, is going away, it's fading away, it's missing. And how then do we adopt something new almost immediately? This from the local actors now. Adopt something almost immediately. You gave me this constituents with this funding to do this, but now I'm seeing a situation where it's an FGM issue. It's no longer an education issue, right? I'm dealing with new local problem on the rise and all of that. How do you respond to those who have local problems that change based on external environment, for the CBOs especially, that change based on external environment? How does one build up to that? I know you as a funder, as an INGO, you may be able to navigate the organizational mechanisms, but somebody who runs a CBO with 3 people, 4 people is like, I don't know what to do here now.
So you see, this is the whole concept of what localization actually means. It is the understanding that a local CBO should not be made to operate like an international NGO. Which means, therefore, that a local actor will be judged on the basis of their ability to solve local problems as at when they come, with the barest amount of resources in the quickest time, as compared to an international NGO, who our policies will constrain me from doing a lot of things I will want to do very quickly. Those local NGOs don't have those kind of policies that we have. So it gives them flexibility to change and to modify, to adapt to situations as they come. It's easier for them to do that. The permission is there, the flexibility is there for them. In fact, in most contracts that we engage local actors with, we put in a lot of elasticity in the contract that allows them maneuver. But of course, within clear boundaries of what will be considered red lines. That for me is what localization is. Not being prescriptive, but agreeing on outcomes. So what do we want? I want to see a classroom. I want to see desk and a board. I want to see a fence. I want to see water in the toilets. I want to see segregated toilets. Get to it. The local actor has so many options. He can choose to say, in order to improve the local economy of this community, I'm going to get contractors from the community, from the teachers, from the students, from their families. So your children are going to this school, but you don't have any livelihood. You don't have anything that brings you income. So come, you work as laborers on the project to renovate the school. We'll pay you. We'll call it work for money. So you work, we'll give you money, right? And it's part of the project. As an international NGO, if I were to carry that same action, the procedure, the policies I will have to navigate to allow me do that as an international NGO oh my God, I may never get around to do it. But for the local actor, they can do that. They will be permissible to do that. They will only need to work within the local customs.
And just to provide context for those who may listen in and no wonder what you mean by as an international, it means that, for example, he cannot give his family member the contract to build defense of the school that he's on. So just
I will not be able to even get involved in the procurement. It has to be a procurement process that we have tenders that must be published on 2 national dailies
and 1,000 clauses or whatnot.
You just can't navigate that. But for a local actor, simply sit with the community and have a conversation about the process and get their buy-in and execute. As long as it is fair, it is transparent, and your costs are realistic, it's allowable.
Okay, so let's now round off with some of your strongest recommendations around what Plan International is doing at the moment. I want to pick recommendations from what you're doing at the moment in order to be able to build up and see how we could scale some of your ideas and your experiences into that line, especially when it comes to you working with CBOs, some of the experiences you've had and some of the things you strongly recommend should be done.
No, I mean, there are a couple of them. I'll mention some. Some of them I'm mentioning now are the ones that have become very contentious. Of course, because of by virtue of my role in many spaces in Nigeria where, I'm talking, on big stages. And in one of them, in fact, this happened actually at the State House. So this was not just in one random hotel. This was right in the State House, at the heart of the presidency, Aso Rock in Nigeria, a big conference. And I was put on the spot to talk about how we've been able to bring localization, to life in ways that transforms especially marginalized and excluded people and populations. And I give this example. So when I joined Plan, we go to the communities in the Northeast, especially anywhere in Nigeria, but I use the Northeast because that's where we have large populations that we serve. In one local government alone, we are responsible for feeding as much as 120,000 people every month. So that's no small feat. But then in one of the projects, we're going to serve hundreds and thousands of families. And part of the work had to do with giving cash assistance on a monthly basis, which we call a cash basket that a family of 5 is supposed to use to feed. And I went to the field and, I interacted with communities. I went as far as Goza, Pulka, Damboa. I've gone to all those places, not through virtual reality, like myself jumping on the helicopter. I'm going to those locations, sitting down with community people to have a conversation and to hear their perspective. Given that I lead the work of Plan in Nigeria, I want to hear firsthand what they experience. And many women will tell me that, Charles, when you people come to do a program of this nature and you register families, it doesn't get to some of us. And I said, what do you mean it doesn't get to some of you? I said, because you register husbands. And I'm like, yeah, that's the right thing to do. That's what the law says. The federal government of Nigeria declares a family as, it's in our laws, a man, a wife, and 3 children. The average size of households, and any Nigerian listening to this can check. The average size of the household is 5. That's what the national statistics use to calculate and to plan and to budget, right? Because you can't count you can't measure what you can count. So the government must have a counting system. And as far as the government is concerned, the National Bureau of Statistics has an average number of households in Nigeria. How is the households determined? A husband, a wife, and 3 children. They call it average because then in some places it's more or less. Of course. Like me, I have only 2 kids. Okay. So, but what happens in most parts of northern Nigeria? Most families, an average man has 2-3 wives, sometimes 4.
Exponentially 15 to 20 children.
Good. So the question is, when you come with a package for a food basket for a household as determined by the federal government, and you meet the man and you give him an envelope for him and his wife and 3 children, which of the wives will get this money? Big question. By that statement alone and that way of working, you have excluded thousands of families and children and women. So what I did, which is a recommendation, I changed. I said, no. What I will do, since I now lead the work of Plan, We will register households by mothers, which means if we go to a house, we'll ask the man, how many wives do you have? If he has 4 wives, each of the wife is a household. In that way, no child is forgotten, no child is excluded, and no woman is forgotten. Instead, they are empowered. The man benefits, because if he has 4 wives, 4 of his wives are getting an envelope for a food basket for the month. So he would have more, as it were. I gave this example at the State House, and a man walked out. He was upset. And what he said for being upset was that this kind of practice is actually challenging our custom and our laws and tradition.
Well, it is actually.
It is.
Okay.
But the question is, to what end? Was it not the same law and custom and tradition that brought about the problem we have, that families are now dependent on aid? So, and I asked, so when we talk about localization, how do we want, because by the international law, if we want to go by international law, it's one household. When we localize it, we look at the reality that one household is more than one man, one wife, and 3 children. That's localization. So in essence, what we do in plan, and what I encourage other people to do, is that when you take an international instrument or a policy, when you go to the community, please look at the way the community is organized and recalibrate your program to fit the reality of how the community is organized. In that way, you will be making sense
and
of your intervention.
Decision-making.
And that is what localization actually means, where you're looking at local realities to solve local problems rather than bringing international, sentiments into it. Because if you go by international sentiment, clearly I tell you, it will be one man, one woman. Whatever the man wants to do with the remaining of the wives and children, he should go and figure it out. Yeah. So that is one example. Another example is this whole thing we call capacity building. That word has been so much, watered down that sometimes we don't understand what capacity building means anymore. So what I tell my team and what we do in Nigeria is when we say capacity building in the context of localization, it is determined by the people who we serve. And this is really practical. So I'll give you an instance. Again, we went to the Northeast. And I make bold to say we Plan Nigeria 2 years ago empowered the very first female phone technician in Goza, not Maiduguri. Maiduguri is the capital.
Yes, of course.
Goza is one of the excluded communities that have been ravaged by, terrorists. We have the first female phone technician in Goza. Because when we went there, as compared to what we would do according to international instruments, when you want to give capacity building, you define it. For most women, we know what it is. If you want to do for women, we already sit down in our offices and customize for women. Oh no, it's going to be grinding machine, sewing machine. They will learn catering.
Soap.
They will learn how to make soap and detergent. Who told you that that's what women want to do? Who told you that that's what every woman wants to do? So we change it. We go, we ask, what do you really want to do? We use questions like, what are you really best at doing? What do you think you will enjoy doing in such a way that when we help you to do it, you will do it with joy and you make money to take care of yourself? And that's where we met this woman who said, you know what? I want to learn how to repair mobile phones. I said, are you sure? She said, yes. We gave her the training, gave her the capacity. She has a big shop. At some point, she was employing other people to work with her. She's thriving. That for us, again, is what localization means.
So capacity building should come from, the idea of what to be built, the suggestion should come from the person who wants to be built.
The person should agree on even where they think they lack capacity first before you make that decision. Because why do we always assume? It's a big assumption. In fact, we make that same assumption even for local actors. We make that same assumption even for NGOs in Nigeria. I tell you, for people like Budget, I've worked with all of them. Budget, Code. Many years ago, they will be termed Nigerian NGOs. And once they say you're a Nigerian NGO, there's an immediate assumption that you need capacity. Who told you that? Where did we get that concept from? So now who is giving Budget capacity? Who is giving Code capacity? Do you understand? So why do we have this assumption around capacity building? So for us, that's one thing we've transformed in Nigeria, the way Plan works. We would always engage with you first to say, What do you need? What do you want? What we do instead is that we present a menu rather than a list. What's the difference? And this is our approach to capacity building. We present a menu. If you walk into a restaurant and you want to eat, they give you a menu. You open the menu, you flip through, and you look for what you want to eat.
Terms and conditions apply.
Terms and conditions
Because
apply.
I may also want to eat something I don't know.
No, yeah, but then at least you make it known, right?
Yes.
So
okay.
you may decide to say, well, I want to try this. In fact, sometimes you may even say, this is what I really want to eat, but I can't afford it. But you see, it is coming from you. As compared to when you get a list, like when you sit down and you're given food. So you sit down and they just bring jollof rice to you and fish. And that maybe is not what you want to eat. That for me is what we do as capacity building. Because there's an assumption that everybody in Nigeria eats jollof rice.
Yeah, that happens when you're an uninvited guest at somebody's
No,
party.
even some invited guests. Some parties you go for, they tell you that we have only jollof rice. What will you do? You will tell them that, no, you didn't ask me before coming to the party if I want pepper soup. But you didn't ask me. How many people will say that in a party? You're giving, you just take what you're given.
True.
So you're given a list. Whereas in capacity building, for us at Plan International, we provide you a menu. And when we provide the menu, is to say, these are the things we can offer. What is your need? Does it match your need? If it does, yes, good and fine, we'll provide. If it doesn't, then we say, where can we get it for you? Is there any way we can help? And we've done that countless times, where we go to a community, we do what we can do based on our menu, and then we exhaust our options, and then we sit together, where can we get this help? And we look for the organization that can provide the help, and we say, they need help here. I always tell my team, see, you know what, we're not in competition with anybody. Nigeria is big enough for all of us. The problems in Nigeria will overwhelm Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg joined together, all the money. The problems in Nigeria will exhaust all of them. So why should I compete with anybody? There's enough problem for everybody. As long as you have the capacity, you will get your fair share. As we say in Nigeria, you go collect. You understand? So there is no need to compete. Instead, we should collaborate. Because what I am good at, I will focus on it. What you are good at, focus on it. When we converge, we bring the best of our worlds and we make change happen. That's the way we operate.
Systematically, I believe that can be done. And that the plan around doing that, funders have tried to get many NGOs to work together strategically, tactically.
Some still struggle. And I think they're just being myopic,
Yeah, not that the some still struggle. It is the struggle itself.
Yeah.
It's the struggle itself.
For us, we keep an open book. I'll give just this last example, one of the things we started doing recently, in fact, we had the big debate in my management meeting. And one of the things we agreed was that, there are details for some of these things which is very sensitive, but Nigerians are listening and I would like to explain it. So for international funding, when you get a grant, as it were, to do a piece of work, the expectation is that you pay for all the costs that are directly connected to that piece of work. When that is paid for, the donors understand that there are back-end activities that may happen. They may not be directly related to the piece of work, but they overall help your infrastructure to keep it stable so that that piece of work is possible. Those things are called indirect costs.
True.
And so the donor will ask you to charge a management fee to recover that cost, to pay for your back end that is not directly related to that piece of work. But those back end are the foundation for why that piece of work is even possible in the first place. Usually, over the years, for the 20-something years I've been in this sector, that money is the exclusive right of international NGOs. Local NGOs don't enjoy it. For local NGOs, they price every single thing you would do, even to cartridges you will buy to put in your printer. You must cost it and put it in the budget, and it is paid for. That's all. For Plan International, we've gone ahead. So when we charge your budget, and your budget comes to a certain amount, the step we're going into is we say charge a management fee on that. that management fee is for you to keep your back-end infrastructure running. It's a bold move. It's a
And it's a pragmatic move.
It's pragmatic. In that way, the local actors then become more confident to focus on the activities, knowing that there's a back-end cost for them to do other things that can keep them sustainable over time.
And there are fewer receipts to actually pursue that.
You know, you don't even ask for a receipt. You charge it once and then there is no accountability. We don't ask you for that. We trust that you will use it in the best interest of your organization. If you use it and blow it in one whatever
Friday night.
Exactly. Because for most international NGOs, that's what it is used for. It is used for keeping the back-end infrastructure going. That's why you see organizations like Plan International existing for 90 years. It's not donors that have paid for us to remain for 90 years. Instead, it is the back-end funding and what we call unrestricted giving that is not tied to one piece of action that has kept us going. So why do we deny local actors that to keep them going? And to that extent, you will find out that there are only very few NGOs in Nigeria. You can count them on the fingers that have existed for consistently 15, 20 years. Very few. You can count them.
Very few, actually.
Very few. Because there's no support. There's no back-end support. It's only few who has broken out of that cycle. And the only way they broke out from that cycle was because there was back-end support. One of them, I use them as an example, Institute of Human Virology Nigeria, IHVN. Dr. Patrick Dakom is the CEO. He's my very good friend. Met him a couple of times, talked, inspired by his leadership. And recently, they commissioned their edifice, which is on Airport Road. It's magnificent. That's a Nigerian 100% NGO. Yes, they had their heritage from their parent body in Maryland, in the Institute of Human Virology, Maryland. But it's a totally Nigerian entity. Go and look at their edifice.
I think the similar story maybe with Plaque as well.
It's the same with Plaque. It's the same with SFH.
Yes.
So there are a couple of examples. But that's why I said you can count them on your hands.
No, of course.
Compared to the number of NGOs we have in Nigeria, you hear NGOs that existed before, they are no more existing today. Why? Because they were built around one man, and then at some point the man couldn't, or the woman couldn't get any resources, and because it collapsed. They didn't build structures. There was no structures because there was no back end to support the structure. You know, there was no succession. There was no succession because the founder couldn't keep up. You know, so who would take over? How would you resource it? But for Plan International, I don't know the founders. I've not met them. They started Plan 90 years ago. Never met them. I don't know who their children are. But I will work in Plan, I will leave. Plan will continue. That's why we've existed for 90 years. Because there's a back-end structure that is well-resourced that outlive any CEO or any director. If we support local actors to operate like this, I think we'll be in a different phase altogether.
Well, maybe that's the capacity building that we should all be looking out for at the end of the day.
Yes.
As we have it.
And I'm going to be helping a few of them to do this training in the coming months. Okay. A couple of them have met me, starting with our own partners. We currently have over 36 partners, local partners that we work with in Nigeria. And I had a meeting with all the executives recently, and this was one question they put to me as Charles. Yes, besides this funding you give us year in, year out, can you help us build credible, long-lasting institutions? So I'm going to run the first workshop for them sometime this year. And I'll see how many people I can accommodate.
Can we make it 37 so I can come in?
I will see how my team is already saying.
My team is pointing fingers at you and she had them on.
My team is saying, can we expand it? Because there are models. There are models, like practical models that organizations can adopt. And to be honest, they will build a long-lasting legacy for the rest of their life. They will die, their children will come and go, and that legacy will be preserved.
Thank God I'm good friends with executive engagement officer. She'll put me on.
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely.
Okay, we have to leave it at that. And that's our conversation on Like a Locum. We'll be speaking with Dr. Charles Usie, who is the country director of Plan International Nigeria. It's been a very pleasant conversation. And yes, this conversation mainly is centered around meeting a gap. And that's what we've really focused on as we went through this. This is co-implemented by Budget Foundation and Connected Development Code with support from the Hilton Foundation. We're so glad that we've been able to do this and have this conversation. I've learned so much from this. I have to say, anybody who runs an organization at all, if you listen deeply to this conversation, you understand that there's a lot of sector dynamics that is involved, and it applies in reality in different ways. And this is how to do it, because sometimes it's not what you think in your head and with you and your laptop as the problem that you need to solve, but it's also identifying the local problem, or should I say, finding ways in which you find the appropriate solution at the end of the day. We'll leave it at that. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm Femi Diamle. Thank you so much, sir, for coming on.
My pleasure.
This is Like a Local, brought to you by Volumpod in collaboration with Connected Development, Budget Foundation, with support from the Hilton Foundation.